A little dog was chained by her owner just before a massive flood was about to strike. The storm raged on, and the poor dog was left helplessly tied up in the chaos. Would she survive the disaster? Why would her owner leave her in such a dangerous situation? Natural disasters like floods are a part of life on Earth, but they often bring out the worst in conditions for humans, and even worse for animals. It's heartbreaking, but many domestic pets like dogs and cats lose their lives to extreme weather events like heavy rain or flooding. Unfortunately, this story is no different for one little dog who faced an unimaginable fate. Samantha and Joy were an ordinary couple, but their relationship was anything but smooth. After living together for a little over 2 years, it was clear their relationship was on the rocks. Joy didn't like animals, particularly dogs. One day, after a huge argument, Samantha decided to take a stand in a way that would get under his skin. She went out early one morning and came back in the late afternoon, carrying a surprise for him. A small, beautiful puppy. Though Samantha liked dogs, she wasn't particularly fond of them. Unfortunately, the puppy's arrival only intensified the couple's tension. Joy was furious, and they argued even more. Despite the arguments, the puppy stayed with them inside for a while, but as the dog grew, the novelty wore off and things began to change. The puppy, who had no name, was eventually sent outside to the yard as Samantha and Joy worked through their issues. Sadly, the dog's life went from bad to worse. She was tied up with a chain, left outside to fend for herself, often ignored by the couple. On cold days, the dog would bark to come inside, but instead, she would just be left with some old sheets to cover her. No one came to help her, and things only got worse for the poor animal. Things took a turn for the worse when a severe storm hit Houston, Texas, in 2016. Heavy rains and strong winds led to a terrifying flood, leaving many people worried for their safety. Everyone hoped the rains would stop soon, but that wasn't the case. The situation worsened, and people in the area were advised to evacuate until the storm passed. On the day of evacuation, Samantha and Joy packed up and prepared to leave town. They took the dog out of the yard, and instead of bringing her inside, they locked her in the front of the house. In the midst of the stress, they fought again. When they finally got in the car, they drove off, forgetting something incredibly important. The little dog, still chained up outside, was left behind in the rising floodwaters. The dog waited, hoping they'd come back, but it became clear they had forgotten about her. She cried for help, but no one was there to hear her. She tried to break free from the chain to seek shelter, but she was too weak. Her years of neglect had drained her strength. Would the fragile little dog survive? As the rain continued, the floodwaters rose rapidly. The situation became even more dire. Luckily, a news crew had arrived to capture the storm's impact. The water was rising fast, and they soon called the authorities for help. They had no idea that the crew wasn't the only group out there, struggling for their lives. Sheriff Troy Nels and his team were also on a mission to rescue people in need. The crew continued their search, using a canoe to navigate through the flood. During their search, they noticed something strange, a set of eyes just above the waterline. They quickly realized they had to help, and as they got closer, they discovered it was a dog. The dog was visibly overjoyed to see them, though she was clearly in shock. The water was almost up to her neck, and no one knew how long she had been struggling in the flood. The team called to her, asking her to swim toward them, but she didn't move. Initially, they thought the dog was simply waiting for her owner, but they soon realized it was much worse than they had imagined. As they pulled the dog into the canoe, they were horrified to discover the heartbreaking truth. She was still chained up. Everyone on the team was deeply disturbed by the sight, asking how anyone could do such a cruel thing to an innocent animal. But the important thing was that the dog was now safe. The dog was wrapped in a blanket and cuddled by Sheriff Troy, who felt a deep connection to her from the moment they rescued her. But the rescue didn't stop there. The search continued, and the team found 3 more dogs on top of a bench, safe but stranded. While Sheriff Troy couldn't shake the image of the dog's eyes begging for help, he knew he had to make a decision. Despite the lack of evidence to punish the person responsible for this cruelty, he decided to adopt the little dog, naming her Hope. The other dogs were taken to a trusted shelter, where they were quickly adopted. Troy shared his feelings about the rescue, saying, "The only thing we could see was her head above water, and I felt so sorry for her." When the crew pulled up close to the dog, they saw why she couldn't swim. She was still chained up and abandoned. After the rescue, Sheriff Troy took Hope to a veterinary clinic to check for injuries and signs of pneumonia. Hope was given a warm shower, and almost immediately, she seemed much better. She wagged her tail non-stop, showing her joy and gratitude. It was clear to everyone that Hope knew she was safe now. Despite the loss of some equipment and footage from the storm, the crew managed to capture the emotional moment. Sheriff Troy was overjoyed to be able to provide a loving home for Hope. A report aired, telling the world about Hope's rescue, and the community rallied around the sheriff for saving Hope and the 3 other dogs. While it's heartbreaking that Hope had to endure such hardship before finding a real home, her story had a happy ending. Months later, she was a completely different dog. She's now well-fed, regularly visits the vet, and enjoys daily walks. She's living her best life with a family who loves and cherishes her. And no one could deny that Hope has become the true darling of Sheriff Troy's family.